Happy Halloween and welcome to the Signal Watch. I'm your ghost, Ryan Steens. Once again, our cadre of co-contributors creep from the crypt for a spooktacular season of petrifying podcasts. We're reaching into our bag of tricks to line up some horrific treats in the phantasmagoric form of films that find a peculiar perspective on familiar frights. Stay terrified. We're going to try to make it work.
White on white, translucent black capes, back on the rack. Fella who goes is dead. The back.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch for a final spooktacular. With me today is
Marshall Preddy.
And Marshall, I was pretty excited when you said you wanted to do this movie or set of movies or however we're going to cover this. And you selected
Halloween, the David Gordon Green Halloween trilogy. Really, that's what I'm here to talk about. Or we can just talk about kills and ends. But I've watched them all three, rewatched the first two, and then watched the last one. So I'm prepared to talk about all three, big picture style.
I'll be candid. I only watched the last two. I'd already seen Halloween twice. So I needed to catch up on kills, and then I watched ends last night. During primetime hours. Did not watch baseball.
And I should probably clarify too. I guess I didn't rewatch Halloween. I rewatched the first David Gordon Green Halloween. I just watched that because I did not realize until very recently that was part of a trilogy. I had seen, the only reason I saw Halloween Kills was my kid had a sleepover with his cousin one night, and they decided to watch Halloween Kills, and I had no intention of watching it. And then all of a sudden I got into it. I was like, because I just assumed pox on all these houses, all these Halloween sequels, especially at this era, they must suck. And I didn't know the David Gordon Green background, because obviously, being an indie cinephile, I know about George Washington. All the Real Girls is a huge fave of mine. He's a fantastic filmmaker. And so I watched Halloween Kills and I said, God, this is awesome. And I didn't realize I wasn't prepared for this movie that my kids were watching on sleepover night, to have this, to really be so much more than is on the surface for both that movie and for, I think, the series. So I just got into it, and then I realized, oh, this is a thing. This is David Gordon Green. This is like a planned trilogy. This is a really unique take on the Halloween series, and so I was excited, and I watched Halloween, and then obviously I saw Halloween. I subscribed. There was a deal; you could subscribe to Peacock for the whole year for $19.99. Well, that's a video on demand price now, so now I have Peacock for the whole year, and I just watched it on there. I did not go to the movies, so yeah, I've seen all three. I'm prepared. I'm excited to talk about it. I think the first Halloween movie is just a masterpiece. And I did not see that until probably 2018. Like, I did not see that when I was a kid. I watched all the Friday the 13th movies when I was a kid. I watched all the Freddy movies. I was a huge horror guy. But I never really engaged with the Halloween movies other than bits and pieces when they were on TV. So I just I did not have a lot of fluency in that. And so then I watched a few years ago, 2000, I want to say 2018. It was right when The Ringer did a big podcast special on Halloween. And I was like, all right, I'm going to go watch this. And so I watched Halloween 1 and Halloween 2, the original Carpenter films. And for somehow just forgot to watch this new reboot, this new David Gordon Green reboot. So yeah. So that's what I've seen. I have not seen I've not seen all of the other Halloween movies. I think there's like 9 other movies besides the 4 that we'll probably talk about today. And I haven't seen any, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating franchise that much like Michael Myers himself keeps returning from the dead. I saw Halloween the first time when I was like 14 or 15 at a sleepover at Justin Lincoln, who is one of our co-contributors. He did not the Near Dark episode, the Twilight episode that is already posted if you want to go look for that. And Justin was a big horror movie guy. I was not growing up. You were asking, and I said, oh, this is all probably good podcast fodder. Let's just hit record. Before we started recording, you were asking if I was into Halloween as a concept as a kid. And very much so. Like we spent quite a bit of time selecting and making costumes as kids and all that stuff. So, but as far as like horror movies went growing up, I really wasn't into them, which I've talked about on the podcast before. And I'm not sure how much I want to belabor that here. And I never really got much out of them when I would watch them, but I liked Halloween, the original one, a lot. And that was always kind of like, well, I've seen that. And unless you're going to bring something that is better than that, I'm not going to bother. Why would I bother? I've had steak. Why would I go back and eat, round chuck? And so it's, we talked last year about Halloween 2 and 3, which I finally watched. I think that they have their merits. They're nowhere in the same ballpark as the first Halloween, in my opinion. Although they're both entertaining. And to add to the mix of things, I don't have a personal connection to these movies, but just as a funny side note, I knew David Gordon Green kind of my freshman year of college. He lived on my dorm floor and didn't really talk much. He was this really quiet dude who lived with this other guy, David, and they were both named David. And David Gordon Green disappeared after freshman year. And I heard later he was at some film institute in North Carolina. And I was like, that's crazy. You got to get your liberal arts degree, because the film thing might not work out. And then he was sending student films back to his friend David, who I was still friends with. They took off kind of together. David Gordon Green did George Washington, which was this big breakout indie smash, and went to go see that and just jaw on the floor. Because I was right out of film school at the same time he was releasing that. And so I was like, shit, like that's when you realize if I did anything, I'd be a total hack, like no skills, which I'd kind of recognized about myself partway through film school. Like I'm just not, I see the people who have vision. I'm not that guy. I'm good at some things, but that's the holistic thing is not maybe me. Then David Wingo, who is the other guy, has gone on to be hugely successful doing soundtracks for both movies and television. And I've lost track of both of them, decades ago at this point. But it's weird to see the leap that David Gordon Green has made from kind of doing his amazing art films, what George Washington, Snow Angels, and then he went to go do like stoner comedies for a while, which was kind of what he was.
Fan. I'm a big Pineapple Express fan,
and that was kind of what he was sending back to David Wingo when we were in college, was these kind of goofy comedies. And then we saw George Washington. I was like, what the hell is this? And then now he's kind of moved into, wrapping up this Halloween trilogy. which it felt incredibly ballsy to me when I'd heard it pitched, of like, we're going to pick up, because they'd already done we're going to pick up with Laurie Strode, with like H2O, I guess back in like 2000 or so. And I've tried to watch it. It's not great. I made it maybe half an hour into it and was like, I'm just bored, and I turned it off. I saw Halloween 6 in the theater, and I will say I still think that is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen in the theater. I was laughing so hard I was crying. Not the intention of the film, but I got an entire theater to turn on a movie, and I still think that that's one of the greatest accomplishments of my film going life, was everyone was roaring with laughter by the end of the movie, because I couldn't stop. Me and Justin and some other people. There may have been some booze involved with the screening. But yeah, it's just bizarre that there's these like 10 movies. Rob Zombie took his pot shot at these things. I watched just enough to know they were trying to turn Michael Myers into like a character, and I was like, no thanks. That's not how I think of Michael Myers. He is the Shape, and that's all I'm interested in. So I was fine with not knowing anything more about the inner life of Michael Myers, which kind of takes us to the first movie coming out. So were you aware of it? Of the first?
No, not at all. I don't even think I was aware, and I'll be perfectly honest with you. Well, when we watched Halloween Kills, you and I, we had on our private Slack, we had a big discussion about Halloween Kills and how interesting it was. I don't think you guys realized that I hadn't seen the first one, or was even aware of the first one.
Okay.
I just wasn't. I did not even realize that there was a movie before that. And so that was part of my confusion. Again, I usually don't engage these late era sequels from these horror franchises. In my head, they suck. They always suck. I don't assume that there's any reason why I should see them. Everything that's worth being explored about these movies has already been explored, and why are we wasting time on this? And I just want to say I am wrong. Like I was just wrong about that. I mean, I think you can, because this makes me wonder, is there meat on the bone Friday the 13th? Probably yes. Honestly, I haven't had one in forever. And can they be revisited by filmmakers in order as a sort of trapdoor to exploring other ideas? I think just now, so awesome. It's such an awesome time for horror. I think part of the reason you see David Gordon Green moving there is this is one of the only areas where you can still work and have your movie come out in theaters and be successful, other than, Marvel and DC IP, if you're going to have it, these movies are still, people still want to go to the movies and see horror films. And so I think that's probably why you see just so much money being invested, so much new films coming out. So I think this is like you can make a horror film a vehicle for so many other ideas. I think that's what's fascinating watching this David Gordon Green trilogy for me. I was just watching this movie thinking, I was just expecting to get that night at my son's sleepover night, just an ocean of dumb, and it wasn't. It was really, I don't think it's perfect. It's not perfect. It's pretty flawed, but this world was such an interesting world to be in. And I loved the way that they were engaging with the material on multiple levels. Really, it's a very, for better and for worse, a very literary exploration of the Halloween series, and I think horror in general. And it was surprising to me that it had that going on.
I'm going to talk trash about humanity in general, I guess.
Yep.
I am not shocked that what he was doing has flown over the heads of a vast amount of the Rotten Tomatoes, audience viewers, and let alone a lot of the critics who don't necessarily. Stuart and I have had many conversations about the phrase you'll see pop up a lot. It's pretty good for a horror movie.
Right.
Or, well, this is elevated horror, or whatever they want to use to justify the fact that they are realizing as movie critics that they are enjoying a horror movie. And I think that there's two sides to that. One, I think there is an incredible amount of shitty horror movies out there, and horror fans will sometimes just lap up whatever they are given uncritically. And you know what? That's fine. I don't sit and watch every baseball game I watch going, well, that wasn't the best baseball game I've ever seen. Like, I just watched a baseball game. It's cool. But I do think that when you do start doing some things that are challenging the audience and make you put on your thinking cap, kids, I think it can turn off a lot of the people who are like, I just wanted to see cool kills. And it's like, well, yeah, I get it, I guess. But I find that personally incredibly boring at some point.
I mean, this series does make a case, though, for incredible kill set pieces. Like,
I would not argue with that at all.
Really, the kids, they definitely do a meta horror film, but they don't forget the slasher part. Like, they don't forget to say, hey, let's have a lot of cool kills in here. Like, they're not doing anything like, let's put Michael into a therapist couch and really right.
That shit ain't happening.
They stay true to what Michael is, I feel like. The shape. They stay true to that. They capture that.
Yeah. And watching Halloween Kills again, kind of coming back to it, and frankly, Halloween Ends just feels so timely and prescient, maybe even because Halloween Kills was filmed before COVID. And when you're watching it, you're just like watching everybody make all the wrong decisions in the middle of a crisis.
Right.
And you're like, oh God, this hurts so bad. This is so real. Of this is what happens when things go sideways, is people, this is how people react. And it's not necessarily always a wrong reaction. You don't really know what the right reaction is until the dust settles. But to me, that's a lot of what was investigating how Haddonfield actually responds, was what the second one was, full, over 40 years of history, what that movie was about to me. And so I'm kind of curious.
Let's start with this. Let's nail a summary down, because I feel like there's a broad, we can broadly summarize what's happening in these the David Gordon Green trilogy, except 40 years later. And in this trilogy, when it begins, Michael is actually in an asylum. So he is shut in the asylum. I think is it the same one that he had previously been in? I wasn't clear on that.
I did not refer to the first movie or two for clarity.
I'm not clear. Y'all kill me if I'm getting the continuity wrong here, but he's in an asylum, he's in an institution, and there's a documentary filmmaker trying to sort of like really get at the heart of what all this is about, and they go to interview Michael at the same time he's being moved to a new facility. Well, of course, as he's being moved, he is able to escape from the bus that he's being moved in, caused by an accident. He's able to get out and escape, and he begins a killing spree, but with the idea that Laurie was right all along. Laurie has spent the intervening 40 years in this continuity. They're not. There's the only film that they are putting into this continuity is the first Halloween movie.
It's weird because there is suggestions. There's suggestions Halloween 2 happened in this.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard that really Halloween is the only movie that is canon in this continuity. But maybe you're right. I mean, there's also oblique references, right? Like, oh, she's also a healthcare worker. Laurie's granddaughter is also a healthcare worker. There's some nice touches there. But that's the idea, is that okay, at least since the first one or two films, nothing else matters. All you have is 40 years later, Michael escapes, and he is on path of destruction that is leading him back to Laurie Strode. And so the first Halloween movie, I think these movies are three different movies with three different scopes that expand. So, but broadly, that's the idea, that he is coming back to at first focus on Laurie. Laurie, who is in the first movie, she's devolved into this sort of she is a paranoid weirdo living out in the boonies who has built her house into a fortress that will protect her when Michael comes back. And he doesn't come back for 40 years until now. So now she's the weirdo everybody else thinks is a loony and a paranoid conspiracy person who's just been taken over by this, not allowing herself to live a normal life. She's proven right, though, when he comes back and he tries to kill not only her, but her daughter and her granddaughter, Allison, right? So the first movie is asking, well, what's this connection between you and Laurie? It's sort of focused on Laurie and her family. The second film expands out to really talk about these people in the town who have been touched by the expanding evil. So they're about, well, I think the first movie is asking, well, what's this connection between Laurie and Michael? The second film is asking, why are people drawn to this evil and drawn to engage in this evil? Because of the townspeople who all have lived in the shadow of this evil 40 years ago seem to get, they find out Michael is alive and now they're driven to kill him. They are really taking on Laurie's mission. That's exactly Laurie's mission. She says explicitly in the first movie, I've been praying that he gets out every night so that I can kill him, so that I can kill him. But it turns out that a lot of the people in the town who are touched by this, Tommy Doyle, the Deputy Frank Hawkins, they have the same Lonnie Elam. These people that have encounters and are tied to the violence of the first movie, it still haunts them. And they decide together they are going to get together and hunt Michael down and kill him, which they succeed in getting to Michael, spoiler alert, but a lot of them die as a result of their confrontations with him. They chase him down, they're ready to kill him in the penultimate scene. They gang up on him and he defeats them. He kills Tommy Doyle. He kills Elam. Lonnie Elam, the two that had survived really encounters with him in the first movie. And then he kills Laurie Strode's daughter in the final movie. And the question is why, the question that I have from that movie is, why can't they stop engaging with this person? Why are they drawn to him into struggling with him rather than trying to escape him? In the final scene, Laurie's daughter goes upstairs to the same house. And in a sense, this movie is also about the house, right? The first movie is about Laurie. The second movie is really about this house and what Michael did there when he was 6, killing his sister. And he reenacts that with Laurie's daughter and kills her. And she's got a weird smile on her face about it, though. It's like almost like a completion of her destiny. And that was sort of what I think we were engaging in what I was engaging in when I got off the movie. Like, what does it mean to really be drawn into the evil, to see yourself as a part of that struggle and that narrative? And I think that's sort of what the movie was getting at. And I think the third movie, where it picks up 4 years later, is about Haddonfield. It's about the whole town, not just this small community of people that were initially touched by the evil, but now the whole town dealing with Michael and dealing with the evil that seems to have taken over the town and seems to have always been there, and really about why do people stay in Haddonfield? That's the question that you come away with. And what I love about this series just broadly, is that it takes the standard horror movie questions that you keep asking. Why are you walking in that door?
Yeah.
Why are you trying to kill this person? Why aren't you running away? Why don't you just move? And it really engages with those questions as to say, look, those aren't ridiculous questions, but people have very real reasons for why they don't take the obvious out. And it sort of engages with the pathology of why people allow the narrative of evil to become part of their narrative. And I love that that's like that's like the sort of through line of this movie, is why it takes those silly questions that people are always shouting at the horror screen, and it really comes back to say, well, this is why. It's because they are tied to the evil, and the struggle gives their lives meaning. Like that's kind of the answer. And is that the right meaning that they should be having? But I look at those three movies as sort of an ever expanding scope of how the evil affected Laurie Strode and her family, how it affected the people the people from that first movie who were touched by the evil, and then just how it affects that whole town. Because in this last movie, what you see is that you sort of get out of Laurie's. You sort of get this movie sort of takes you out. We can talk about why this is. It takes you out of Laurie's story for a little while to focus on a character named Corey, who accidentally killed is the kid he was babysitting, and became an outcast in the town. And in this film, through that process, he is being bullied by some marching band kids for some reason, and and he's thrown over a bridge at one point, and that's where Michael finds him. Michael, who has been hiding out in a ravine, in a drainage system cave all these years. It picks up 4 years from the events of Halloween Kills, and he's just been living there in this cave. And he sees in this kid who accidentally killed and is an outcast in town, who accidentally killed the kid he was babysitting. He sees in this kid part of himself, and in there, I guess, in some sort of magic eye thing, he looks into Michael's eyes. Michael lets him live, and then he sort of uses Michael as kind of an avatar, right, to sort of like a kind of like I don't know, some sort of he uses Michael to take his revenge on the town that has spurned him, and in the process becomes kind of Michael himself.
Yeah, there's some really interesting generational stuff in the third one of how are we going to continue the generational trauma, as Twitter would call it.
Right. Right.
And I thought that was really interesting, and really, I can see why people probably didn't love it if they were coming for a straight, like, Michael Myers is going to kill a bunch of babysitters sort of movie. But I think for what I was, and I follow along very similar logic trains as yourself with what these movies are doing and what they're about. And we haven't really talked about this before our audience. So, and I find the second one fascinatingly challenging. And I think that there's a lot of them ending ideas in ellipses in both movies. And I appreciate that they're not necessarily saying, and this symbolizes this, but at the same time, there's times where, for example, in the last 10 minutes of Halloween Kills, where, you have Michael in the street surrounded by people, and I think my brain has almost made all the connections of they're doing each other a lot of damage. As they're trying to get Michael, they're trying to do it one by one instead of together. Mm-hmm. They're failing. They're failing over and over, and Michael just keeps getting up again. And I found all of that narratively challenging and fascinating. And I think people were like, "Oh, it's stupid. That's, he should be dead," or, and it's like, well, instead of just getting mad at it, why don't you ask what the movie is trying to do here? What is it actually trying to say once people actually all have him cornered and it doesn't matter? It just makes things worse. And I think it flows back towards a lot of what you're talking about of how do all of these kind of people still engaging with Michael, who are now become killers themselves. How is that a victory? How is that the win? I mean, the first time we hear them all say like "evil dies tonight," they're all pursuing, they're going off into the, not together. They're all going to scour the town separately, and that's going to go badly for them, as we'll see. And then they come back and it's, within the hospital, and they hunt down the wrong guy.
Yeah, it's a witch hunt.
Yeah.
For one of the other escaped asylees.
Yeah. Who's clearly not Michael Myers.
No.
I mean, anyone, but they're just so wound up in that moment.
Well, that was an interesting story because that's why it gets at, that's why we get the expanding scope, right? You get in the first film really talking about Laurie and her family and what this has done to her family and the conflicts therein, and then in the second movie, you really have two kinds of people, right? There's people who sort of know generally, hey, I know that there was this a long time ago, and some people got killed, and that's all. So it's a big enough town that not everybody sort of has internalized the trauma of the night in 1978 when Michael Myers went on a Halloween killing spree, because it's been 40 years and it hasn't happened since, right? But so you have a smaller group of people who absolutely do know who Michael Myers is and absolutely do have seen the devil, have seen the shape, or know what it looks like. And then you have a bunch of people who don't. And so the town gets caught up. They know that evil has to be stopped, and they're recruited into this thing, but they have no idea what they're looking for. And ultimately, they kill the wrong guy. But what's interesting is they barely take a breath after that. They're like, "Oh yeah, that was unfortunate." You see Tommy Doyle, who's still leading you see the sheriff, who's destroyed by this. The sheriff of the town has no connection to the first to the original. So this is what's happening now is the worst thing he's ever seen. And to see this innocent man be killed by a mob, this is a black guy who is he's witnessing a real lynching, and it's destroying him. And Tommy Doyle's like, well, we still got to get the right guy. It's like, it's this weird. He's like, you guys are fucked up. You guys are lost. You guys are consumed by this. And you're not really, you're as bad as he is, is really the message of that movie. And when they say evil dies tonight, maybe it's them too who is the evil. And I think that's what I thought was really interesting about this movie, was how it's really the sickness that sort of Michael projects into the people who are his victims.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting in that it kind of follows the same. When I watched Halloween 2, if you go back and listen to the podcast, I mean, it's been a year since I recorded it, but I remember cranking about they really sideline Laurie for most of the movie. Michael is drawn to her. And so he wants to finish her off in that version. And the interesting thing about this one is you find out he might not even recognize Laurie at all. He doesn't really know who she is. He's brought to Laurie by the crazy doctor in the first movie. Michael doesn't intentionally pursue Laurie Strode. He's trying to get home. Right. Is what he's trying to do.
Right.
And look into the window, and as we find out, look into his own eyes again. And there's a lot of that of me trying to figure out what is Michael's criteria for murdering people. Of is there one, or is he
there something that he is specifically looking for within the people that he is choosing to murder? And I never quite sorted all of that out. And I don't know if there is an answer there. But in the second one, she gets sidelined again, but they actually use it intentionally of she can't be leading the people. She can't be anything but kind of a weakened voice on the sideline through the course of the film. She's not going to be a partaker in the actual events of Halloween Kills, other than what's happening with the townspeople. At least she never engages with Michael. She's never within a mile of him through the entire movie. And so seeing her, and of course they play on that. They play on the expectation that Michael is coming for her. He's going to come to the hospital, which is how they play into the other guy getting murdered. Who is yelling, "Help me," by the way, when people start pursuing.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely messed up and pathetic. But that final scene for some reason is really stuck with, or not the final scene of Judy Greer getting killed, but the scene of the townspeople doing each other damage with guns and with shooting across Michael or through him and hitting each other, and then Michael just getting up and turning back on them has really stuck with me as a new kind of classic thing in horror. Of you finally got the chance to do the thing that you're like, well, you just need to get all the people together, and it really is kind of asking, and why would anybody let Michael just go to his house? But anyway, I think that they're both extraordinary movies. Halloween Kills ends is even more complicated. A friend asked, I made a joke on Facebook last night about, walking your dog in your suburban neighborhood on a breezy October night is, after watching a Michael Myers movie, is not as much fun as it should be. And he was like, well, how was Kills? Because this neighbor can see straight through my window into my TV. So I think he knew I was watching Ends last night. And I was like, well, it's complicated.
It really is.
And to a shocking degree, it's complicated. I don't know if I am like chest thumpingly excited about it, but I think it's also a earned final chapter for what they did.
I wrestled with it too, because there's kind of like, so it really centers on this guy named Corey, who's never been in any Halloween. And there's a kind of like, is this Poochie? Is this what's happening? In this, that we're bringing in the young character, but they really do earn it. Like, it starts with one of the most memorable sequences I've ever seen. He's just babysitting this asshole kid, and the kid is trying to fuck him up, lures him upstairs, but, plants a knife on the stairs. Basically, he knows the story of Michael.
Yeah.
And he's explicitly trying to spook this guy into thinking Michael is returned and is in the house. Then the babysitter goes upstairs, Corey, who's our new protagonist. He goes upstairs 3 flights up. This is a big house with a very spooky atrium that drops straight down. He goes up there, he goes into the attic, and the door shuts behind him. And it's the kid. The kid shuts the door behind him and locks the door. And so now he's locked in this attic. He's freaking out. He thinks Michael Myers is in there. The kid won't let him out. And he's just very claustrophobic and panicked. And he starts kicking the door to get out. He kicks the door. The door swings open, and it knocks the kid over the banister down 3 or 4 floors to his death in that same atrium that we opened with. And he does that right as the parents are walking. It is like a really cool way to open. And so they're introducing this character, but they're, like you say, they really kind of earn his presence. It isn't really a Poochie thing, because they really earn his presence. And then following that, he's arrested, and we open, because that's Halloween 2019. We opened 3 years later, which is 4 years after the events of Halloween Kills, and he's an ostracized kid. Before he was going to go to engineering school. Now he's working at a shop, at an auto repair shop, at a scrapyard, and he's got no prospects. He is totally isolated from this community. They all think he killed this kid. Even though, credit to the criminal justice system, he was able to show his side of the events and not go to prison. He's just like a walking, he's walking around ostracized from the rest of the town. And you sort of see like that's when Laurie has spent that intervening 4 years really working on self-care. For the first time, really, in the entire series, she's worked on herself, and she is, and so has potential love interest, Deputy Frank Hawkins. Both of these people are tortured by Michael, tortured by what could have been, how many times they could have killed him, and how many times they failed, and they're finally moving on with their lives. She's writing a memoir of it, but she's not in a self-made prison anymore like she was in the first movie. She's actually out. She bought a house, a regular house in the neighborhood. She's interacting with the neighborhood. She feels like she's in a really good place. And he's, Deputy Frank Hawkins has bought a guitar. He's like, I'm remaking my life and I'm going to be happy. They've both decided that. She sees this kid, Corey, who's so messed up, and she's like, well, I think he's got potential. He hasn't really been given a fair shake. I'm going to set him up with my daughter. For some reason, she sees this town outcast and thinks, oh, my hot daughter would probably like this guy, which is weird. It really says something about the dating prospects, the rest of the guys in this town, that Allison sort of gets fixed up with this messed up kid, and she thinks, oh well, this guy's better than my last boyfriend, who's like this like asshole aged frat boy. She's like, oh, finally someone my age that I can make it, that I like, that I'm interested in. What I think is interesting, because I think I've already seen some criticism of why are we outside of the Laurie story? Why are we on this kid? I think it's fascinating that both Laurie reaches out to him because she sees the good in him, and Michael reaches out to him because he sees the evil in him. And there's that duality. He becomes for both of them a kind of object of that they can imprint themselves on. And I think that's what's fascinating. That's right. That's why, and I don't know if you were thinking the same thing, but I think that's why they earned it. Like I came around to the idea that, okay, this guy is the center of the story. And there's some really good reasons why. There's some really good reasons why. Again, what I talked about earlier, they're expanding the scope. It's not just Laurie's family. It's not just the people who remember that time. This whole town is fucked up because of this history, because of the deadly events of what's now came 4 years ago. They've now got generational trauma that's affected people even they know now.
Yeah,
and it's now you're asking the same questions, and I love that they finally bring out a really incredible question, which is, why are they still there? Mm-hmm. Feels consumed by this evil. Why do we have to be here? What's our why does this have to be our story? Why am I getting passed over? Why is Laurie's daughter Allison getting passed over promotions by her boss who's fucking her coworker? Why is this other guy staying where he's an outcast? He's unloved. He's basically chained by his history of an accident. And what even the kid's father acknowledges is an accident, and he can't escape it. Why don't they escape the gravity of this town? And it's the same question we're asking. And that's what I love about this little series, is that they really are engaging with the very obvious questions that all horror movie watchers ask. Why are you opening that door? Why are you trying to fight that guy? Why don't you fucking move? Why are
Yeah.
this whole fucking town is evil? Why do you still live in the Amityville house? You know that place is haunted. Don't go back there. And so it really is. I love this series because they're really engaging in those questions and coming up with answers that I think are interesting about humanity.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that there was some extension of what was going on with Corey to Allison as well. I mean, she's talking about how she wants to burn down the town
Right.
as well. And she's clearly unhappy and dissatisfied. And you do get the idea that Corey expresses for her that if she abandons her grandmother, Lori will return to the bottle and go back to her paranoia. And so she needs the buoyancy of, that her granddaughter basically is a caretaker. And I found that really, really interesting. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about this film, and by the way, I will also mention when I was watching this, I knew some people who went through some trauma that was very particular, and they ended up dating someone who they had not previously known before, who had been an instigator of that same trauma, and they very much romanticized it. And that was kind of what I thought of when I was watching this. I mean, it didn't work out. They didn't stay together very long, but that was what I was thinking, is like, this actually feels pretty real. Like you're looking for someone who can kind of understand what you have gone through. She's watched, her mother save her, and then her mother die 15 minutes later, in the prior movie. She saw all the events of that night and grew up in the shadow of Laurie Strode. And this guy has had nothing but hell for 3 years when we catch up with him. And things are just getting worse on top of that. He's been henpecked by his mother, and clearly can't even deal with high schoolers who are bullying him to buy beer. And by the way, those kids nailed it from a performance standpoint. I was like, oh my God. Yes, these little shits in the parking lot. I absolutely know who these guys are.
It's hilarious. They're band dorks.
Mm-hmm.
When you're getting bullied by band dorks, you are at a low point. Like, these are not the football bullies. These are not the jocks.
No.
These are the cool kids. You're getting bullied by band dorks. That is a low moment for this kid. And it shows just how far he's gone in terms of how isolated he is.
Yeah. I don't know what they could have done to make it more clear, kind of like what was going on with it. I mean, we're so used to kind of being spoon-fed narratives at this point. There's a reason, I say this all the time on the podcast, there's a reason that Marvel movies are 3 hours now. And it's so you're never left with a question about what's happening. They explain every detail down to the nth degree, and they do not edit, right? Because otherwise they have to deal with YouTubers trying to decipher things incorrectly for, the 4 years between movies. So yeah, I mean, I felt that, and then what is it like to then live in that town where at any given moment that trauma is going to constantly be refreshed in new ways that are accusatory. And that all felt, especially in this era, incredibly real. Like Laurie leaving the grocery store after her engagement with Frank, and then running into the victim from the prior film. And then the DJ who, and this was the thing that really stuck with me, especially in the wake of the Jeffrey Dahmer, whatever is happening right now on Netflix and other places where the millennials are discovering Jeffrey Dahmer, and like seeing him as this kooky character who's kind of spooky. And it's like, wow, if you didn't grow up with Jeffrey Dahmer in the newspaper, of course he feels like a kooky character. Like, they're selling Jeffrey Dahmer Halloween costumes this year. Like, that's really hard for me to get my head around. But at the same time, I had a coworker like a couple weeks ago who's younger than us by a decade and not from Austin. And you're not from Austin, but I don't know if you'd ever heard about the yogurt shop murders. He kept wanting to like make light of this thing. And I'm like, no, that was kind of Austin's Michael Myers moment. Yeah, like really. It was massively traumatic. And audience, if you've never heard of it, back in like 1990, they've never solved it. Like 4 teenage girls, 3 of them working on I Can't Believe It's Not Yogurt, basically were assaulted and murdered in their store after hours, and then it was set ablaze. And the very much like all the Haddonfield stuff, they went and ended up in arresting just some teenagers who'd been kind of joking about it, made their lives hell. One of them ended up dying suicide by cop when he was like in his late 30s, early 40s. I mean, the long tail of this kind of trauma is intensely real. And this is the first time they're starting to deal with it now because they're returning to these things. Like, I guess I've not seen Dr. Sleep, but like, they're returning to this stuff with like The Shining and whatnot. But this actually felt like some thought and heart was put into it. Of what is it like when, you could be at work, you don't know who you're talking to, and you start bringing up the yogurt shop murders. Like, you could be talking to someone's mom. Like, you legit do not know right now. And so I found all of that really interesting about the movie. And then you start, we also have our friend Alex Jones, who, totally is just abuses trauma for fun and profit. And that is a very real thing that we're not dealing with very well. So anyway, those were some of Ryan's deep thoughts as he was watching the film.
I agree with all of that. I think that I really love the way the filmmakers sort of like, we're starting over. Why don't we ask these questions? Like, what is it really like for these people to have lived with the trauma and to have these people as neighbors, and the ideas that it's such an amazing moment when Laurie is in the store with Deputy Hawkins, and those two are sort of having a connection again. They both have reset their lives. They're on good footing now. They feel like, hey, I'm looking forward instead of backwards. I'm going to focus on my work, my art. She's writing her book. He's playing guitar. They're really moving forward with their lives. She walks out. She's smiling. She's got a spring in her step. And then the woman comes out. She's like, "What are you smiling? What are you doing? What gets you the right?" And I think this question is asked more than once by people who are suffering and still living with trauma in this movie. What gives you the right to move on with your life when you are the person who caused so much grief in this town? And that you get the feeling now that that people now look at Laurie after the events of Halloween Kills as the instigator. You're the one who, through your personal drama, at one point they say, make it about you. Well, she literally makes it about herself. That's the thing. She made the murders that Michael committed about her for 40 years. Mm-hmm. And in some people's minds, brought that horror back and visited upon this town. It's her responsibility. She's the one who lured him back into a murderous rampage that killed all these people in awful ways in Halloween Kills. Well, one of the people that survived was Sandra. who we now see she's in a wheelchair. It's left. You think I thought she was dead after kills, but she. Michael takes a broken fluorescent bulb and sticks it right in her neck and just leaves it there. But she witnesses her husband dying and is left there and apparently survived that injury. Well, now she is confined to a wheelchair and holds a lot of rage toward not just Michael, but Laurie. And that I think gets to the heart of what I think is in both of the first and second movies, which is how people come to depend on trauma as part of their narrative, and the murders, how that affects them, but it becomes a part of who they are that they can't let go, and it sucks them back in. That's why Tommy Doyle gets killed. That's why Lonnie Elam gets killed. They can't resist the pull of struggling and trying to defeat Michael, because they think the only way to beat him, to escape him, is to destroy him. But that's not the only way. Again, you're in a horror movie, you're asking those questions. Why is that the only way? Why can't you move? Why are you stuck here? Why can't you move on with your life? And I think what's awesome about the third movie is that there's an implication, at least, I'm going to see if I can explain this correctly, that all of these people are moving on with their lives, including Laurie, including Deputy Hawkins, including Allison. They're all trying to make a new start. And that is what, at least on some level, has sapped Michael of his strength. Like, it's almost like Santa doesn't exist anymore because nobody believes in him. Well, that's kind of what's happened to Michael. The evil is having difficulty thriving now because everybody has abandoned the idea of Michael and is trying to abandon and move to a place without him, where he's not at the center of their lives. And whoa, that's an interesting idea. Why, why?
And I think, and I think it ties directly into, on a more visceral level, what they're illustrating in Halloween Kills. Of the more these people are going bonkers on Michael, now he's superhuman, right? And it's like these movies never say there's magic in the world, right?
Right.
But it's hard for me to read it any other way. No. Other than you are fueling him with your fear and your rage and whatever evil you are conjuring up inside. And that's why he is supremely, superhumanly powerful in those moments. And now he's living in a tunnel, eating rats. And that's where he's at, because Laurie bought a sweater set.
Yeah.
I don't mean that critically. I mean, like,
no, I mean, her house is a very Kincaid, beautiful, like it's a very beautifully done house. It's bright colors.
I would kill to live in that house, by the way.
I know. I'm like, apparently Haddonfield is a fantasy land where you could buy a super sweet house. And despite having no apparent job, I mean, Social Security can go far in Haddonfield, apparently.
Yeah.
But they're moving on with their lives. They're doing what I think Allison and Laurie's, daughter, Karen, really wanted them to. Like, I want you to let this go. And she finally does. And I think that's why we see Michael at such a low point. He's in a ravine, in a cave, isolated from everyone, living off rats, or whoever happens to drop by, when he finds Corey. Corey is thrown over into this homeless encampment. Michael comes to get him. And that's where you see sort of, I think, as close as maybe we've ever been to saying it's in the eyes, right? Mm-hmm. That's sort of like they make a big deal in the second movie about the gaze, about Michael looking into the reflection of the window, and what is he seeing? Is he looking at us, or is he looking at himself? And what is the source of this evil? Well, now I think we know it's in his eyes, and
I mean, they even
that and Corey.
They drop the undergrad Nietzsche, soundbite of you look into the abyss and the abyss looks back. That's one of the callers into WURG.
Yeah. But that's the whole movie. Like, this whole movie is a meditation on that quote. Like, it really is.
Yeah.
But I think it's deeper than just even that would imply, right? The lest you be, it's like, he who fights monsters,
Mhm.
beware because you might become the monster that you're fighting. But the second half of that quote is I think more open to interpretation. It's gazing. If you gaze into the abyss is also gazing back at you. Well, Michael is the personification of that quote.
Mhm.
He is the abyss gazing at himself, and he does that. And that you see that is what both restores his power because he communicates that evil to Corey, and now it's in his eyes. And Corey is bringing back people so that Michael can kind of feed on them, and the evil can regrow. Like he brings Michael back to life. That's the implication of the movie.
Mhm.
Is that
Yeah.
he is bringing Michael back to life with his own heel turn toward evil, right? Because he is becoming the monster. He's a successor monster to Michael. He literally puts on the mask and becomes Michael as part of this movie. And so that's the text, but the subtext, I think, and this is where I really, I might be reading too much into this, but I think the movie is asking as well. I think all three movies, what is the abyss? What is it just that it's not just about Michael. It's not even just about evil. It's about what are we doing to ourselves that's holding us back? You are gazing into the abyss and you're letting it take over you instead of becoming who you want to be. And what's holding you back? There's a part of this movie which is just two kids trying to escape a fucked up town and not being able to get out of not being able to escape the orbit, and that's that to me is maybe the best version of this. It's you're just trying to get out of this. You're just trying to escape Haddonfield, and you can't.
Mhm.
And I think, and the same thing with Hawkins, same thing with Lori. She can't escape. Why doesn't she move? Why can't she just get on with her life? It's because she's let this evil take over her.
Yeah, it's funny. We were watching. Jamie has not watched any of these, but she came in for some reason for the second. Well, that's not true. She came in for the second half of Halloween Kills, and then she watched all of Halloween Ends with me. But when we were watching Halloween Kills, we hit the Big John Little John scene, and I turned to her and go, "You know why I'd survive?" She's like, "Because you've run away." I was like, "Fuck yeah!" Because Big John and Little John sees the back door is open, and they choose to go explore the house. They're gonna man up and protect their home. And I was like, oh wait, I'm right. I completely just unlocked this fucking movie. Like, I'm not wrong. That is actually what the movie is saying. They are criticizing these two guys for going and exploring their own house when they know a murderer is in it.
That's the house where they bought the house.
You bought the house. Yeah, you're trying to turn it into your super chic house. That is a murder house. And I was like, yeah, I guess, I accidentally talked myself into thinking, this is very specifically what this movie is trying to say. Just walk away. You don't need to do any of this. Anyway, it's deeply disappointing to me that the movies are, I mean, their ratings from both critics and audiences are extremely low. The only heartening thing is no one can keep away from these movies either. Tons of people saw these movies. If nothing else, to hate watch them, right? So David Gordon Green will make lots of money from having made these movies, and Jamie Lee Curtis, who I want to live in wealth and luxury. But it's a little frustrating to me that it's like, well, apparently you needed like a pamphlet handed to you at the beginning of the movie to, walk you through it.
Walk you through what they were trying to do. Hey, this isn't a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, ironic reboot.
Yeah.
It's actually a real, like, engagement with horror tropes and why and a reading of horror tropes. This is the movie you make when you definitely took some undergrad creative writing classes.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way. Not in a bad way.
No, no.
Like, we're deconstructing horror movies with the horror movie. It's very meta, but I also thought it was very humane and like a way of thinking about, asking those questions. It's not an accident that the successful gay couple and the successful Black couple get murdered. They get murdered by Michael Myers, but are they getting murdered by the town? Are they getting murdered by rural America? Like, that's really the implication. You guys are buying land in small town America that doesn't want you there. And so it's really, I mean, there's a meta way that this is sort of asking questions about, about America and an America that's now again increasingly hostile toward minorities, toward LGBTQ individuals. Like, why do we still keep trying to build our lives here? And what are the consequences of that? And it's messier. That's a messier and harder question to ask than you think. Why don't you just leave? Well, because it's hard to leave. I have a job here. I have a family here. I'm taking care of my mom here. So there are lots of reasons why I'm not leaving this stupid small town with a limited ceiling. And it's because I have roots here. It's complex. It's complicated. And I love the fact that you're taking that answer, making it real, turning it to 11. And not even when there's a murderous, unnameable evil can I leave this fucking town. Well, that's how important it is. That's how important roots are. And that's why we do what we do. Even when it's maybe not in our interest to stay. But there are things that keep us here. And it's not just a centuries old evil.
Yeah, it's in a lot of ways, especially I felt it with Kills. Like, this is what a horror movie looks like, not Kills, with Ends. This is what the guy who made George Washington ended up at in his thinking about the horror. The overall horror of Haddonfield. Like, you go back and watch George Washington, and it's, the economic 150 years of economy of race relations, all impacting these young kids running around. And this is that same thoughtful filmmaker applying in the same elliptical terms a lot of the same ideas to something as seemingly uncomplex as a guy in a white mask who is running around terrifying babysitters on Halloween night. And I really, and I appreciate the perspective and the thought that went into this. And we're in this kind of weird era of let's reboot everything or pick up, actors are willing to revisit their characters they started with or we'll recast with Ewan McGregor or whatever. Everything from the frickin' Mary Poppins reboot to, Star Wars and everything else with, everyone's kind of returning and revisiting these things. And to me, this is one of the more successful ones. The other, it doesn't feel like they also use the first one to kind of reset the table to remind you this is the world of the, first movie. But if you're going to do it, I'd much rather see this than Robert Englund trying to put the Freddy makeup back on at this point in his career, and be old Freddy, I guess. Because Michael Myers at the same time should also be like 70 years old in this film, and he feels like it in the final one, where he never felt like it in the prior two. So for the reasons we discussed. But I don't know how much I'm going to rewatch these. It's not like watching a Hammer horror where you just get a little visceral thrill and that was fun and you move on with your day. Like this is the full course meal that you can't have every meal.
I really enjoyed watching it in succession and rewatching Ends. I thought I was just going to skip through, or rewatching Kills. I thought I was just going to skip through it. I think Kills is probably my favorite of the three movies. I was going to ask you this: of the three movies, what's your favorite? I think Kills is mine, but I like them all three. And I think the tone, like there are some interesting things about these. Like I love the tone of this movie, which is very different than John Carpenter's tone. Mm-hmm. It's like a totally different style. He's so naturalistic, where I think there's this sort of soft focus, kind of nostalgic, looking back on America, kind of like with Carpenter, almost like a sort of like where he sort of Haddonfield is sort of Norman Rockwell America, whereas like David Gordon Green is showing you really every phase of this town. There's the downtown area that we see in Kills. There's the rural area that you see with, and again, this is what makes me think this is like it's sort of an American allegory is what he's making. There's rural America, there's the downtown America, and then we get to see a lot of the industrial side of Haddon in this movie. We get to see the radio station. This is like The Simpsons. You're going all over town. You're going to get to see basically every part of this and who's doing what in the movie. We get the DJ, we get the store owners, we get the hospital, we get the doctor. You get to see sort of every facet of this town by the end of it, and it really makes you engage with this as a sense of place, not just one family, not just one neighborhood, but Haddonfield and how they're dealing with this evil. And it's very obviously kind of, it's very obviously about America and maybe what America is dealing with writ large. What are America's original sins that it can't seem to escape, despite being on its surface a more inclusive, more diverse society. We're still struggling up against our history of discrimination and racism and slavery. No matter how integrated we get, no matter how diverse our economy gets, no matter what kind of trappings of success that we have, we're still dealing with the original sin. And how do we defeat that? Like it's just an interesting movie that it is about that you can read it as that allegory, but at the same time, read it as very real people who are struggling with the questions that we always ask about horror movies. I really love the dad whose son dies in the opening minutes. He starts talking to Laurie about what he saw in Corey before he killed his son in the accident, and what he became later, what he saw after Michael looked into his eyes. And how that's a very different kid. He's like, look, it was an accident, but now he looks like a killer post Michael. Now something's changed in him. I wanted to forgive him, but I can't because he's gone to the other side. But it's also in that same sort of soliloquy that he has. He says the people who ostracized Corey after his son's death were really, he says, they took my pain, they took my despair, and they made it about them. Now they're going to torture this kid, even though I could forgive him and they couldn't. Why? They couldn't let go. The whole town is against him. And that's really this movie writ large. They took the pain of the people who were killed by Michael Myers in the very first movie, and they made it about themselves, and they couldn't get away from the story. They took that initial narrative and they cared more about their narrative than they did about creating their own stories and creating their own lives and quote unquote moving on. That's the horror mistake in a nutshell. You are buying into the killer's narrative instead of creating your own, and that's the deconstruction of the horror film. That's why you keep opening the door. That's why you go back to the murder house. That's why you buy the fucking murder house. That's why you make your house an elaborate trap, so that one day if the killer comes back, you can defeat him. And that's why that's really why we watch horror movies, to give ourselves over to that evil, because it's fun, because it gives our lives meaning, because it gives our lives stakes that they don't normally have, because we're bored, and I think that's it. It's like my life has meaning now because I am in a struggle with evil. I'm in a struggle with Michael Myers. My trauma is my meaning. And it's not. And it shouldn't be. And the people who tell Laurie to get on with their lives are right. Get on with your life. Don't let the town kill you. Move.
Yeah, there's a lot of really, really good stuff going on in these. Like I've already kind of ranted about, I really wish people didn't need a pamphlet to get through these movies. But, we were really lucky these three movies came out and they exist in the form they do. I mean, Jamie Lee Curtis seems really pleased with them. And, they got her to come back even after H2O, which I think is no mean feat. I kind of hope they leave this for a while. I really hope they do not go, Corey returns, 3 years from now.
What they've set it up for is the spirit now, because now this is like an explicitly transmissible evil, and the mask still out there on the coffee table. So it's like, it's going to exist in some form or fashion, but maybe leaving Michael behind, or at least this version.
Yeah. Which is, is interesting in itself on a much, much more basic level. Carpenter's original idea was to basically do a different kind of Halloween story. He was going to basically put out a different Halloween movie every few years and maybe hand it off to other people. And Michael Myers was like the first story and second story. And then that's why Halloween 3 is this weird season of the witch thing.
Right.
And then they were like, no, Halloween is Michael Myers. And then he basically ended up leaving the franchise at that point. And I think that there's probably something to that concept of from a, like, if you want to make money on a franchise, can you do something where you keep expanding within the town of Haddonfield, or however you want to do it? I imagine David Gordon Green's going to hang up his spurs on all of this at this point, but and maybe we'll get a romantic comedy about Frank and Laurie in Japan. Maybe that's the next thing. That's the sequel. A light silver romantic comedy. But I don't.
The ending. What did you think of the ending of this? Because I think we should talk about that before we get out of here. Like, the ending is really, it's really interesting. I'm not sure that it doesn't undercut the movie a little bit. But so I wanted to talk about it, where they now Laurie kills Michael. They finally kill Michael, and they're like, no, we're gonna really kill Michael. And I don't really object to that part. They're gonna take him to the scrapyard and grind him up, really atomize him, so that if there's anything left, it's gone. But the way the town, it's like, I thought it was really interesting. You listen to the Lore podcast, right? There's one of the themes of the Lore podcast is that these evil phenomenons that are passed down through generations of storytelling, they're town phenomena, and it's always the town that are dealing with. They're digging up bodies, they're driving a stake to the heart. They're always the ones who are trying to deal collectively with the evil. And this really is an example of that. They're going to like they town gets together and in a procession, really. That's what it is, a funeral procession for Michael. They bear his body up to the grinder and dump it into the grinder to see that he is killed once and for all. It has very religious overtones. He is kind of ritually crucified in the kitchen on the butcher's block, and then his body is disposed of.
Yeah. At first I thought they were going to quarter him with the police cars. I was like, oh no, don't show that. They'll give people some bad ideas. And so I got narratively what they were doing with, we're going to slow drive him through Haddonfield, and people, a mass of people will follow us, and we're going to do this silently. Like you said, like a funeral. I think it's necessary after 40 something years of Michael sitting back up to show the audience too, like, we're done. Like, we're not burning him where he's gonna like somehow mystically because he did that after Halloween too, right? Like we are literally going to show you him going into the wood chipper, so we can all agree that this is done. I felt like it was as much for the audience as it was for the characters in the film. And from that, I was fine with it. It felt a little weird to have a horror movie that doesn't just end with like, well, I guess we're done. But there's so much more going on here. I think that because of that, I found it a little troublesome they didn't deal with Corey's death beyond what we'd seen. Like, I don't think it would have, depending on what they want to do going forward, who knows, what is having Corey cremated or something would have been satisfactory as well. But like once you open the door to do that with Michael, I felt like they also needed to say something about the remains of Corey.
He was also infected with the evil, right?
Yeah. I mean, they literally show his hand and go, oh, infected. Yeah. I mean, that's when you first get them actually saying it out loud.
Right.
So, yeah, this is kind of where like I felt like the ending of Halloween Kills to me felt a little more elegant than the ending of Halloween Ends.
Yes, that's my feeling too. And I don't even have a problem with the obvious. They want to kill Michael. They want to show the entire town that he's dead because this is and there's but the weird, like, oh, we're actually driving the knives through his hand, pinning him to the block. Now we're burying his body to its final resting place. We're sort of like, it is very much like we are bringing you to the crucifixion. It's like those sorts of almost messianistic, like anti-messianistic overtones are really. I thought it was really over the top because I thought, the whole thing this movie's trying to tell us is get over the special power this guy has, not celebrate the special power that he has. And I thought it really, for me, a little bit that those overtones of sort of crucifixion imagery undermine that message for me a little bit. I thought of what this movie's trying, or maybe it's saying the town's still making the same mistake even as they try to put this behind.
That was kind of how I felt about it. Yeah,
power over them, even to the point of ritualizing his death. And so maybe that's the message. But I thought it was really interesting. And they kept the mask. Why keep the mask? The mask is like, oh yeah, that old thing. That's just a symbol of overall evil and destruction that has been visited upon this town for 40 years. It's a coffee table discussion piece now in my house. What the fuck? Why didn't that get ground up? It's like, oh, I'm gonna hang on to this. Well, again, you're right. So maybe that's it. Is that the evil will live on because the IP has to live on? But it's again, that there's two answers to this. Why can't we let this go? One of them is money. The IP is still valuable, but the other one is because it's still part of who we are, and we can't let it go. Because that pain and that story is so much interesting than the boring story that's really true about us all.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think it was the intention of the film, but it certainly reflects on truisms of how we do respond kind of in the wake of things, and everyone kind of also has different ideas about what is the appropriate response, to the death of someone you don't particularly care for or who's been a very bad person. It always feels like it's like the last shudder or shock in how it's interpreted and how it's discussed. And don't speak ill of the dead. No, let's spend their the week after they died on Twitter litigating their lives. I feel like it was necessary from like Laurie's standpoint to see him go into the chipper. I understand why she wanted to tell everybody else. I understand why you're going where you are with the crucifixion stuff, and I definitely thought about it a bit. Maybe, slamming the Antichrist with a refrigerator is not part of that scene, but it
well,
I was literally looking for specifics, like, are they going to stab him in the side? Like, I literally had that thought as I was watching it.
Well, and what's in the hands? Like both he and Corey have wounds to their hands.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is like a little weird. It's a little overwrought.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I thought that was interesting. Like that, but like, there's no way this cannot be intentional. What are they trying to say with this?
Yeah. I mean, my assumption is we didn't see Corey's body get scorched, and he didn't end up in the chipper. And there definitely was a, generational thing going on at a pretty rote level. So, I mean, I won't be shocked if Blumhouse says in, 3 years, now it's Corey, whatever his name was. We're going to just keep having different shapes over the years. And
got his own mask, right? That creepy scarecrow mask.
Yeah. I mean, and you can do a lot with a scarecrow mask over the years, right? So, Allison now, whoever that actress is, she's got a career ahead of herself.
She does, but she also has a career because, man, she is hot and talented. She's like the best thing in this movie. Like she is like, I'm like, what is wrong with the dudes in this town that she can't get a better boyfriend? I'm like Pearl Jam in this movie. Can't find a better man. I really want her to have like something because she's like luminous and she's getting with the town weirdo. Why? Is there nobody else? Like
yeah. And I thought in the 2 years or whatever since the prior film, like, maybe it's just the material she was given. She really was genuinely like, she went from being like, she's all right to she's really good in really this film.
Good. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, let's hope she has the same success as Jamie Lee Curtis and does this till she's,
pretty similar, right? Jamie Lee Curtis wasn't obviously well known, and then they did the same sort of casting with her, casting a completely unknown actress, and she's, like I said, to me, she's certainly the best thing about this movie. After playing a good sized role in Kills. Last loose end I want to tie up is that what we see when she walks in on her dead boyfriend and Laurie Strode has the knife in her hand.
Yeah.
She thinks Laurie has killed her boyfriend.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, she's not entirely wrong, but yes, it's very visual at this point.
Right. And so how do they try to sort of like, it's a neat trick narratively, because in a sense it's the same thing that happens to Corey, right?
Mm-hmm.
It looks really bad. The optics of the situation.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing. Yeah.
But it really, and but when he kills himself with the knife, it looks like she's the killer because she picks up the knife. Why are you picking up the knife? Don't.
Yeah. If someone's got something in their throat and their jugular, so you're not going to save them by pulling it out. Yeah.
No, you aren't. And why are you picking that up? Of course, she looks like that. But they sort of paper over that, where it becomes narratively necessary for her to go, oh, I know he killed those people.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he was like, she has to actually say that she knows that because of how clumsily it's set up. And they kind of throw Michael into the grinder together. But I think that was clumsy for me. I didn't like the way that ended. And again, I think overall for that reason and a few others, I really prefer Halloween Kills of the three movies. Halloween is a necessary setup for the other two movies. Yeah. And Halloween Kills, I think, is the most successful of the three movies. Just getting everything right. I like Ends a lot, but that's how I felt. It was more elegant and interesting, engaging. That's the one where you're sort of really thinking about why are horror films set up the way that they are, really interrogating that.
Well, I think we've talked for like an hour and a half, so I think we've probably worn out the attention and patience of our audience. If y'all have any thoughts on this, if you saw this, didn't like it, did not, if you loved it, actually, I'd love to hear from you, because I think that right now is much more rare of a circumstance. But do hit us up on Twitter, or hit us up on SoundCloud. And let us know what you thought of this trilogy of films. And we will, this is it. This is the final thing I'm going to release, I think on the 30th, I think is when I'm planning to release this. Maybe a little earlier. I'll get twitchy and want to release it. But this will be it for Halloween 2022. Marshall, I am so jazzed that you wanted to do this. I really enjoyed this series of films, and I knew you'd go deep on these. So
fun for me too. Thanks for having me. I'm glad I got to do these. These are really interesting. It now makes me want to go to see the David Gordon Green films I haven't seen. I just think he's a unique voice in sort of filmmaking. He's so hyper naturalistic. He's so interesting the way he looks at things. I just thought this is a really interesting. I've never seen a horror series quite like this one, and I loved it. And I guess we should give Danny McBride some love too, for this series of movies, who is really a polymath when it comes to the different kinds of, like both of them really, the different kinds of content that they'll do. They'll do anything, the Righteous Gemstones, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They've done a lot of TV and a lot of movies together, and this has me stoked to see the Exorcist trilogy that is on the it looks like is on the horizon.
Oh, I hadn't heard about that at all.
I think it's going to be a trilogy. I think it's not just going to be a remaking of Exorcist. I think he's rebooting the Exorcist franchise as next on his list. And I think it's going to be a trilogy, is what I heard. I could be wrong. But I think if you look at that IMDb, I think the next two movies he's working on are Exorcist related.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I thought this would be it for him on horror. So
no, I don't think so. I think he's doing Exorcist now. So again, like what we talked about earlier, all the money is going to horror. If you really, it's like sort of what they say about lawyers and drunk driving. If you want to get into a courtroom, you're going to try drunk driving cases, because that's now where you can try the most cases. That's kind of what this is. If you want to get into the theaters, you're going to do horror. And this is, I just think it makes the genre so interesting because you can make any kind of movie, but if you've got a horror slant, that's going to attract funding. That's going to get you into theaters, into wide release. And it seems like David Gordon Green has gotten that memo. Big time.
Yeah, I support it. All right.
J.J. Abrams of horror now. He's just going to take on all the old horror IP and reboot it.
I think J.J. Abrams gave that a shot and realized it wasn't Spielberg. But
mixed results. All right. Shut up.
And another 90 minutes later, they wrapped up.
Whoa! Let's talk about that. All right.
All right, everybody. Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.